Hello and welcome to the Pod People, the show where Nazis are bad and punching Nazis is good. I'm Nazi puncher Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm Corporal Benjamin Sheets, Nazi puncher in charge. Yeah, we're here to talk about Overlord.
We mentioned a little bit about Overlord last week, and we talked about it months ago on our Cloverfield episode because it was originally announced that this movie was going to be Cloverfield 4, or Cloverlord more specifically, and well, I guess that's not the case.
Thankfully,
it was still produced by J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot, but the inevitable hackneyed Cloverfield tie-in that I was expecting never happened. I mean, I guess we didn't stay till after the credits, so maybe it could have, but...
Well, I did see a little bit that it was denied that it was a Cloverfield movie, so...
Good, excellent. I think this movie stands a lot better on its own than trying to tie into that convoluted franchise.
Yeah, I want to see more schlocky sci-fi movies without them having to feel like they have to pigeonhole them to be Cloverfield movies. And this movie does that pretty well, I think. The whole concept of the film is it's right before Normandy, right?
Yeah, right before D-Day.
A group of soldiers go into enemy territory in France to blow up a church where...
a radio tower.
Yeah, where the Nazis have a radio tower and have kind of a communications base to help out with D-Day.
Right, so their ticking clock is that they have to blow up this tower before the ships land at Normandy, so the Allies can safely have air support for their ships on D-Day.
Little do they know that under the tower there are some strange Nazi experiments down there. So
yeah, it's kind of your cliche Nazi zombie kind of thing with the Nazis doing experiments trying to create super soldiers, and our team of American soldiers who have to stop them before it's too late. Very basic, predictable plot, but one that I think is packaged really nicely, to the extent that I didn't really care how predictable everything was.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. A lot of it is very tropey and predictable, but when it's fun, it's damn fun. I will say this movie had a few pacing problems. Mm-hmm. The opening sequence is incredible. It's really well done.
Sets the bar extremely high.
But this is almost a common thing in World War II movies, I feel like, where they have a really visceral, intense opening, a la, Saving Private Ryan or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the movie can't quite keep up that intensity.
Not for the whole thing, at least. I think
that's what this movie kind of faces, is after the opening, it kind of falls into a bit of a lull for about half an hour, I would say, before it starts picking up again.
Yeah, by the third act, it ramps up again, and I think the third act is pretty spectacularly fun because this is such a sort of cliched premise. I think what's necessary to make a movie like this good and entertaining is how you deliver a lot of the stuff, and I think that is this film's strong suit. Once it gets into like the action, like you said, there's this whole section in the first and second act for about 30 minutes where they're like sneaking into the town and like setting their plans to blow up the tower, and they meet a local girl who helps them out and shelters them and all this stuff that is like, it's okay, but it felt a little bit like it was trying to be Inglourious Bastards to me.
Well, and the thing is, they're doing a lot of setup in that section for later sections, but this movie is not that complex. I feel like it doesn't really need all of that setup, you know?
No, I agree. What I will say, though, is I think this movie does a pretty good job of building all the characters. I liked all of the characters for the most part. Some of the soldiers are just kind of archetypical cliche soldier characters, but it does a good job of like letting you get to know all the main players and their different personalities and stuff like that. That sort of helps drive their motivations for the most part.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're kind of predictable characters, but they're likable characters.
Right.
Which helps a lot. Well, in the opening, the sergeant is played by Bokeem Woodbine.
My man.
Yeah, he does a really great job.
He's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
One of my major problems with this movie is they killed him off too early.
Yeah.
I wanted him in like the whole movie. Because Bokeem Woodbine is such a great actor, and he's a really good character actor, and his character in this movie is like such like your perfect over the top World War II era like army sergeant, just like totally unflappable and talking shit even when their plane is being shot down. And like later when they find him in the woods and he's surrounded by Nazis, he's like, any of you Krauts got a cigarette? None of ya? And then they all just shoot him. Yeah. Oh man,
Yeah,
Bokeem Woodbine is awesome.
He was a little underutilized in this movie. The party he did have was great, though. But yeah, the other characters, they are pretty predictable at times. You know, like there was one character, immediately he introduced his character by like saying he was writing a novel or like documenting his experience in the war. And so my mind was just like, yeah, he's going to die. And just
he does immediately after he says that, it steps on a landmine. Yeah, there's some of that predictable stuff. And you've got the loudmouth Brooklyn sniper guy who keeps talking shit to like the French girl's little brother. And he's just like, I hate kids, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, well, obviously later in the movie, he's gonna sacrifice himself to save the kid. And he's gonna realize that he's actually a caring individual and he likes kids, which is almost exactly what happens, except he doesn't die. He just takes a bullet saving the kid, but then is okay. So there's a lot of those cliches. I like our protagonist a lot, Private Boyce or whatever his name is. He's sort of the reluctant soldier who got drafted and is not really cut out for, fighting and killing, but, ends up doing what he has to do because of his principles of goodness, which once again is not a particularly original character idea, but I think it works.
Yeah, it works.
I like having him as our eyes, and he's not just this like cold-blooded, hardened soldier character, badass. I don't think that's what, because it's a horror movie and they're up against like pseudo supernatural elements. So I think for him to not be like your total American badass is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, it makes it a little more relatable and it grounds the story a little bit more. I will say, like, for such a campy movie, it did a good job not feeling too goofy. Like, it definitely gets goofy at times, but it doesn't get too tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially in the third act, it gets kind of grindhousey at times, which I think lends itself to a certain degree of campiness, but it still approaches it seriously enough that it's not like, oh, look at us, we're making a goofy Nazi zombies movie. It takes itself seriously enough that it doesn't pull you out of the world, but it is still, funny and very fun. At a lot of moments.
Well, one thing they do to kind of up the seriousness is they have all of the French people speaking French and the German people speaking German.
Right.
Which doesn't always happen in a lot of these schlockier World War II movies.
Right.
I appreciated it in this movie. At times, I felt like it was a little excessive.
I mean, I would say that overall, outside of like the Nazi zombie stuff, outside of like the sci-fi horror shit, it felt like a pretty realistic, grounded depiction of war for the most part.
Yeah, I agree, but I feel like it's weird to have that clash with the Nazi zombie second half of the movie, you know? Like, it didn't bother me all that much because most of the excessiveness of the realism for me was during that, like, 30-minute lull. And once it got past that, it kind of shed a lot of that anyways.
Yeah, the French girl, Chloe, I think her character's name is, her relationship with like the Nazi general or the colonel or whatever felt kind of half-baked to me. It's established that like he comes to her every now and then and like basically rapes her, you know, and in the sense that he says that if she doesn't cooperate and fuck him, then he's gonna like kill her family. And that stuff felt a little bit unnecessary to me, especially to the extent that our protagonist has to sort of be like her white knight and like come in and save her from being raped, whereas she doesn't feel like a character that really needs saving. So that felt a little corny to me, because like we see her kick some ass later in the movie.
Yeah.
So to have that sort of dichotomy between her as like very self-sufficient, she's obviously been living in Nazi occupied France for a long time, like she knows what she's doing, to have her be saved by the American guy at one point feels kind of
yeah, it feels like they almost gave up on some of the characterizations. Like, at first she was speaking only in French, and then eventually she just started speaking English.
Right.
Same with the German guy, too. Like, at first he was just speaking German and a little bit of French, and then by the end of it, he was just talking in English.
Right.
And it's like they gave up on some of the realism as the movie progressed.
Well, I mean, all of our protagonists are American, and everybody knows that Americans don't speak any language other than American. So, I mean, I think it would have been kind of pointless to have the Nazi general speaking in German to the Americans, who they're just like, I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that kind of accentuates the problem I have with them trying to be so realistic in that 30-minute lull, especially because they were trying to do so much French language and German language stuff, only for them to give up on it in the second half. It is
established that our protagonist Boyce does speak French.
Yeah, his grandmother was Haitian,
and he grew up in New Orleans. So like I think they could have done a little bit more with that, having him sort of be like a medium between the French people and the other American soldiers. I think it bothered me less with the Nazi speaking multiple languages than it did with the French girl knowing English. I mean, they give her, you know, reason because she went to university in London, but like, I don't know. I kind of see where you're coming from with that. They sort of like, they set up that he speaks French, but then that doesn't have a payoff because then everybody just starts speaking English.
Well,
and his French is never utilized again in the rest of the movie.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I guess you kind of have to have some transition between schlocky, over-the-top stuff and the realism that they had in the opening sequence. Because the opening where the plane is shot down is very intense and
extremely.
You know, while it's a big set piece, it doesn't feel over the top.
Well, what I like about that opening sequence is, for the most part, it is completely contained to inside the plane. I mean, we get a couple of shots from outside, but it's not like you don't see the shots of like the German fighter pilots like flying around and like shooting at the planes and the dog fights and stuff. It's very claustrophobic because it is all contained within this like jam-packed like troop transport plane, and especially being from the main character's perspective, and he, you know, obviously really doesn't want to be here anyway and is not cut out for it, to have him like jammed in with all these other soldiers in a plane with no way to get out because it's obviously thousands of feet in the air and being shot at by fucking other planes and cannons on the ground and shit. Like, it does a really good job of feeling fucking dangerous. And I really like the sequence of when the plane is shot down and they all jump out as he's falling, and he's like upside down. He's falling for a long time trying to deploy his parachute. I thought that shot was that whole sequence was incredible. Awesome.
Even when he fell into the water, right, with the parachute, like, it's still intense because he's stuck onto the parachute and has to like cut himself loose.
Cut himself out of all of this gear so he can actually swim to the surface. The movie sets a really, really high opening bar, which might be somewhat detrimental to itself because, like you're talking about, it's hard to follow that up, and the stuff that follows it doesn't quite do it justice until the end, I think.
Yeah, it picks back up eventually, but it does have some pacing problems because of it. I wonder if they would have focused less on realism in that transition period, if it would have worked a little more for me, if it would have just been a little more balls to the wall. For example, when he's going down to the basement by himself and discovering everything, you get some really cool stuff in that sequence. You know, you get like the disembodied head. Repeating arete, which is stopped.
That whole the whole set piece of the Nazi lab under the church is really great.
Yeah.
I think, I agree with you. I think we could have gotten to that point sooner, introduced the Nazi super soldiers sooner, kicked off the action sooner, because this movie, I think, really succeeds in its action and some of its like gruesome body horror and stuff. And I think if they had sort of done away with the side plot stuff in the latter half of the first act, I think it would have been stronger all around.
I almost wish they would have kept the guy who got killed by a landmine and just had him go down to the basement and get killed, you know? That way we could have seen more of that body horror stuff from the get-go, and without letting the other main characters in on it, we could have started to learn about that stuff.
Well, yeah, because they capture the Nazi general and have him tied up in the attic of the house where they're staying. And then when our main character comes back from the base and is telling them about everything he saw, he grabbed a syringe of this mysterious serum. And then we get a prolonged scene of the corporal, who is the sort of hardened American badass character, just beating the shit out of the Nazi general for a while. And then when they decide to move him, he pretends to be dead and shoots one of the other soldiers, the photographer character. And then for some reason, the protagonist decides to inject his dead friend with this mysterious serum that he knows nothing about but has only seen horrible things happening because of. That was confusing for me. There's some motivations in this movie that don't make any sense. Like, I know they had to come up with a reason for them to use the serum so we can see what it's all about, but I think there's a better way to do it than that.
Yeah.
I think it even would have been better to have the Nazi general inject the other guy with it when he escapes.
Yeah, I will say the sequence where after he's injected, he kind of transforms reminded me kind of of the Thing, in the way like he's slowly turning non-human and like his head flings back.
Yeah, I did think that whole sequence once he was injected was pretty good, with him first sitting back up and being like, I feel great, and he looks down and the bullet hole in his chest is gone, and then he accidentally crushes the canteen of water and then accidentally headbutts a like wooden post and snaps it, and then as he's like morphing and like the transformation is so powerful that he like breaks his own neck backwards and then it repairs itself. That is all really good and gruesome. I agree with you on that. I just don't really like the way they got there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the scene is effective, but I think they could have gotten to it in a way that's more believable and less confusing.
100%. Oh, one character that had me kind of confused was the Jewish soldier. So he was like captured immediately after the plane crashed, and our main character saved him in the basement.
Right.
And he was like hooked up to like a big pipe thing.
Yeah, with like a giant needle that was like sewn into his stomach. I kept expecting there to be some sort of payoff with that.
Yeah.
Like I was expecting him to like transform at some point.
Same,
100%. And start like killing his friends, but then that didn't happen, and
yeah, nothing really came up.
No, he ended up being one of the like 3 people who survived at the end. And at that point I was expecting them to do like a fake out ending where like, oh, we saved the day, everything's okay, and then that dude starts transforming or something like that, and then cut to credits like, oh shit. But no, that didn't happen either. That was kind of a disappointing payoff as well.
Really weird to me.
Yeah, his character was kind of meaningless. Like, yeah, he helped the sniper guy at the end like draw all the troops out of the base so the protagonist and the corporal can like get in and blow everything up. But yeah, other than that, like they could have had any character.
He was like
do
the
that.
least developed character too.
Yeah, absolutely.
His only character trait was he was Jewish.
Right. Well, and also he's gone from like the first half of the movie because, like you said, he gets captured right away, and then they find him again later.
Yeah.
So that was kind of confusing.
And I mean, it was probably them thinking, oh, we need a Jewish guy to fight the Nazis because World War II. But you could have at least given him like more of a character than just that.
Right. It's like they were trying to have their one Inglourious Bastards character, but that was really underdeveloped. He felt like a throwaway character for the most part because he didn't do anything that was of like particular importance to him as a character. Like his entire role in the movie could have been filled by any other character.
That was a weird choice.
Yeah.
I was very confused by that character. But I thought the other characters were pretty well-rounded. And once after that dude gets injected and, you know, we see what happens, the movie really starts to pick up.
Yes.
In my opinion, the 8-year-old brother of the French girl is taken by the Nazi and he escapes. And so they launch a plan to...
But in his escape, he gets shot in the face.
Yeah.
Not fatally, but we see him go back to the lab and immediately grab 2 syringes of the serum and inject himself, and then turns around and reveals the mess of his face, which I thought was a pretty cool reveal because we didn't see it up to that point, and he's getting all vascular and shit because of the serum. Like, why is that such a thing in horror movies and sci-fi movies where there's like some mysterious like serum and you inject yourself with it and it just makes you extremely vascular? Make those veins pop. Like a good workout. Steroids, bruh. That's just an aside. But yeah, their plan to infiltrate the base is actually fucking awesome.
Yeah.
The way they initiate that, they capture this Nazi on a motorcycle, and they send him back into the base with his hands tied to the handlebars of the motorcycle. And he's got a piece of duct tape over his mouth, and when one of the other Nazis pulls the duct tape off, it pulls the pin of the grenade that they had shoved in his mouth, and they filled the motorcycle sidecar full of explosives. That was fucking awesome.
Yeah,
that was so goddamn good.
That was one of my favorite parts.
Mine too. It was awesome.
Yeah, so they created a distraction, and they had two of them just picking them off one by one.
Make it seem like the whole American army is there to draw as many of the soldiers out of the base as possible, while the other two slip in and plant the explosives. But it's not that easy, of course, because the base has our newly super soldiered Nazi general in it, and some other random Nazi zombies. I will say, we were talking about on the drive home how we both thought that there would be more like creature effects in the movie, and there kind of weren't a lot, which was somewhat disappointing to me.
Yeah,
a lot of that final action sequence was just like gunfights.
Yeah, they had a lot of good gore, but they didn't really have any creatures. I figured that like the way they had them set up, they would do more like accentuations of the human body and like Cronenbergian body horror stuff. Almost.
Right. Well, and I also expected them to be dealing with a lot more of these mutant super soldiers, because other than like the main Nazi general, there's like one other that gets let loose and chases Chloe around for a while, which is fine, but I think I would have liked to see them be up against like a group of these super soldiers and have like be really outmatched and have to find a creative way to survive. I think that would have been a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, because like even them on their own were threats. We saw Chloe, having to deal with one of them,
right?
Who's like a monstrous one with fucked up arms and stuff. But
very wet boy.
Yeah, all she had to do is flamethrow him, and he was done. Like, I wish it felt like more of a threat.
Right, yeah, she was able to dispatch it pretty easily. Like, it chased her for a little while, and she shot it a few times, but then, yeah, ultimately just found a flamethrower and torched it, which, of course, in these movies, anytime you find a flamethrower, like, that's going to be the weapon. Fire kills everything. But instead, most of the climax is the protagonist and the corporal fighting with the mutant general guy. And there's some pretty good action and fighting in that scene. One thing that bothered me a little bit is like they established with the guy who transformed in the attic earlier, they established that the only way to kill these things is to destroy the head like you do, but they seem to forget that when it came to the Nazi general. At one point, the protagonist like unloads his machine gun like right into the dude's chest, and then later like drives a metal pipe through his chest when his back is turned. Like,
when
what?
He could have easily done it through his head.
Done it through his head and ended it right there.
Yeah, that was weird to me too.
Yeah, it's like you set up rules for your monsters,
and then you don't really follow them,
and then you forget them immediately. Yeah, I thought that was a little bit silly. But I thought that final fight scene is pretty fun. The corporal, who is wounded badly, injects himself with the serum and becomes a mutant American super soldier. I do wish there had been a little bit more with that, where it had been like a real clash between these two super soldiers.
Yeah, we got it just a little bit, and the whole time I was thinking like, it's a Metal Gear Solid fight right there.
Right. Well, that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping for something along the lines of like, like the Incredible Hulk, like with the Edward Norton one where he fights mutant Tim Roth at the end, and they're just like these two big guys and they're smashing shit and just beating the shit out of each other. That's what I was really hoping for. And we only got a little bit of that, just like a tease before the corporal sacrifices himself to blow up the lab. Which also extremely predictable. He even has the line like, "I was never coming back, and I knew it." And it's like, of course, God damn it.
Do you think this movie was a little too restrained almost?
At times, I wouldn't say that as a whole it was too restrained, because I think it did some really great over-the-top shit.
Well, I think the best parts were the over-the-top stuff.
Well, exactly.
I think
exactly.
If they would have pushed that further.
They could have. I don't know if they were just trying to play it safe or what, but yeah, I agree with you. The really over-the-top shit was the most fun, and I do think they could have safely pushed that. They really should have just, like, embraced the grindhouse aesthetic fully and just gone buck wild with it. But I don't know, that might not have appealed to as wide an audience. Like, this is a Bad Robot production. It's not trying to be too niche. And I think that, like, really over the top stuff is kind of niche to a certain extent.
Which is a bummer because, I think it's just the death of action movies as a genre, because this movie at times feels like it wants to be an action movie, but never feels like it can push itself to that level where, like, it's afraid to get too goofy in a way with it, I guess you could say.
Right. Yeah, I can agree with that.
And for a World War II movie, like, some of the best ones are the really action-y ones, especially when you're trying to do a movie like this. Like, there's a reason, like, they kind of have a grindhouse tradition.
Right.
And it does some of that. And the parts it does of that, it does really well. I just almost wanted more of that.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Like, we do have such an oversaturation of action movies these days, and a lot of them are doing the exact same things, and the ones that are the most fun are the ones that really go over the top and make it fresh and try to have fun with it. I think that's the best tradition of action movies, even if you look back at some of the, like, greatest classic action movies, stuff like Die Hard, stuff like the original Predator, Rambo, shit like that. It is really, really over the top, and that's what makes it fun. And I think a lot of action movies have forgotten that to an extent and are just so by the book that they forget to have fun with what they're doing. And I think that I don't think this movie ever really stops being fun, but it doesn't quite have the balls to push it into the level of greatness, I think.
I would agree.
Because I think this is a really good movie. I think it's short of being great, though.
Yeah, and I think if it would have been more unafraid to go to weirder, more insane places, it would have been a great movie.
I agree.
Because a lot of those elements are the strongest part of it. So it was weird to see them selectively be restrained, especially when they're telling such a story that's essentially by the numbers and predictable.
Right.
Like the biggest shining point is, the stuff that makes it stand out, which is like the awesome gore and effects and the set pieces. So like
I do appreciate that they didn't go the safe PG-13 route with this, and they weren't afraid to be gory. I think that did elevate it to a certain extent.
Yeah, honestly, it's one of the things that made it stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it would have been so easy to take this movie and be like, well, let's make it, like, appeal to a really wide audience. Let's cut out the gore, and we'll make it safe, and a lot of the death will be off camera. And then we can make it PG-13 and market it to younger kids, too. And I'm glad they didn't do that.
Yeah, no, I think that would have been a terrible, terrible move.
Yeah. Do you want to rate?
Yeah. So I think this is a really solid entry. It's a really fun, schlocky war horror movie. It does have some pacing problems, like the opening is incredible, but it kind of falls into a lull for a little while after that. But when it's fun, it's really fun. The gore effects, both practical and CG, are really great. The acting was surprisingly pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, overall it was a solid movie. I'll give it a 3.5 out of 5. Like I mentioned before, it falls short of being really great, but it is a really good movie.
Yeah, I can pretty much second that. The character development was good. The characters were likable, despite their cliches and a couple of throwaway characters. Like you said, the acting was pretty strong from all fronts. Other than Bokeem Woodbine, I don't think I recognized any of the actors in this movie from anything else. So nice that they got some fresh faces in there. The gore is great. The set design is awesome. Pretty well shot as well. From a cinematography and camera work standpoint. Yeah, I just think that it played a few things a little bit too safe, and that prevented it from achieving greatness. But overall, a film that I would recommend and I think is enjoyable. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 pods. So that'll give Overlord a average of 3.8 out of 5 pods. Check it out if you like watching Nazis get blown up and shit. It's that's always a nice catharsis, especially in the times that we're living in. So yeah, go watch some Nazis die spectacularly. And with that, I'm gonna take us briefly into Metacritic Corner.
You freaking bricks! What will you learn? What will you learn? That your actions have consequences!
So I'm not doing a user review this week, but I did find a review from The Guardian by Fun Police Peter Bradshaw, and I'm going to read through this article pretty quickly. This gruesome film has arrived like some particularly nasty new version of Call of Duty, destined to be played for days at a time by a regrettable and clearly unrepresentative gaming subset of pale, dead-eyed loners. It is a bizarre and weirdly humorless and explicit action horror fantasy set during the Second World War, specifically just before the D-Day landings, hence the title, derived from Operation Overlord, you see. It is written by Billy Ray, who scripted Captain Phillips in The Hunger Games, and directed by Australian filmmaker Julius Avery, all working from an original concept from producer J.J. Abrams, the idea being to make some money from a customer base which might loosely be described as incels and incel fellow travelers. Jesus Christ.
I mean, in fairness, it's not a groundbreaking idea.
No, it's not. But what did this movie do to this man?
Right?
It is June 1944, and Jovan Adepo plays Boyce, a young private in the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army. He and his buddies are being parachuted into France on a mission to disable a radio tower positioned atop a church, thus disrupting the Nazis' communication network and assisting the Allied invasion on land. A more perfunctory and MacGuffin-y plot device can hardly be imagined, but no matter. Having arrived in the nightmarish chaos of occupied France, Boyce and his dirty half-dozen prepare to approach this church only to make a very strange discovery, that it is the site of Nazi medical experimentation, turning civilian prisoners into Uber soldiers in preparation for the forthcoming 1,000-year Reich. There is something deeply crass about this facetious nonsense, and everyone involved in this film might want to reflect that Nazi medical experimentation during the Second World War did in fact happen under circumstances other than these. It was a very real thing, not just a death metal horror movie gag. Overlord leaves a very nasty taste in the mouth. 1 out of 5.
You got so mad that they were showing.
That's why I decided to read this article, because this guy took this movie so personally.
Yeah.
Like, enough to say that it's only watchable by pasty, dead-eyed loners or incels. Like, what the fuck? Like, what did J.J. Abrams do to this man? Did he fuck his wife or something?
Did this critic have family that was like experimented on or something?
I mean, maybe, but like, Jesus Christ, it's an action horror movie. Like, calm down. Like, how are you so unwilling to have any sort of fun?
Yeah, no fun allowed.
Exactly.
Jesus.
Fucking fun police.
Ugh.
Anyway, this has been Metacritic Corner.
When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
So before we finish up this episode, I do want to give a special shout out or shout down to Vogue, who this week wrote what might be the hottest take of 2018 with their article entitled "Wasn't This Supposed to Be the Golden Age of Horror?" by Taylor Antrim. So I'm going to read some selections from it.
Word.
Because it is something. Remember when horror was good? It wasn't that long ago. Just last year, in fact. Scary movies went on an absolute tear in 2017. We had blockbusters like Split and It, auteurist chillers like Raw, It Comes at Night, Thelma, Super Dark Times, and of course, Get Out. Jordan Peele's masterpiece of social horror should have won that Oscar, and when it didn't, maybe the air went out of the genre? Something happened. I'm not sure there's been a good scary movie since.
Fuck off.
Okay, there was Hereditary in June. There was A Quiet Place, which was a fun 90 minutes at the multiplex, but really more of a PG-13 thriller than a horror flick. What else? Did you subject yourself to Winchester, The Nun, Slenderman?
We did, all 3 of those.
Yep, and they were all awful.
They were bad. I can agree with that.
We didn't even get a decent shark movie this year. Wrong. The Meg was very good.
Yeah.
No, 2018 has not been good for horror. And I'm including David Gordon Green's wildly overpraised Halloween in that assessment.
Wrong.
Which has been making buckets of money, perhaps because there's nothing else remotely scary to go see.
Wrong.
But Halloween is not scary. It's
Wrong.
a ploddingly retro slasher film, and strenuously, I'd say cynically, woke in its vision of female empowerment via revenge.
Wrong.
Please check out the French flick Revenge if you want to see something really provocative on that subject. It's hard not to be happy for Jamie Lee Curtis, who has been taking a victory lap for headlining the highest grossing horror film in history with a female lead over 55. But that money doesn't make Halloween any less forgettable.
Wrong.
Suspiria is not forgettable. Nor is it, I hasten to say, much of a horror film.
Wrong.
Despite being a remake of one. Italian director Luca Guadagnino has turned to Dario Argento's campy 70s classic, a crimson bloodbath of a movie, into a self-serious art film set in Berlin, which is so stylized and airless that it's impossible to feel much of anything watching it besides confusion.
Wrong.
Horror needs an element of fun, of dark delight. Hereditary, which I liked, missed this quality too.
Wrong.
And I defy you to take any delight in Suspiria, or to explain what on earth is going on in that final set piece in which heads explode and bodies fall apart, and never once does your heart race.
Wrong. Suspiria is not supposed to be a delightful film. Not every horror movie is supposed to be delightful.
It has been rolling out slowly across the country and may eventually perform well at the box office, probably because there is so much pent-up demand for horror and so much goodwill for Guadagnino after the transporting Call Me By Your Name. I will say I wasn't bored in Suspiria. I was bored in Halloween, but I certainly wasn't scared.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, she goes on to talk about TV horror and complains for a couple paragraphs about that. And then in the final paragraph, she says, "This all the more disappointing because just living in through 2018 has felt a bit like a horror film. The counterintuitive thing about horror movies is that they actually make us feel better, not worse, about the horrors of the real world. We go to horror not to be terrified." The ace horror director Karen Kusama, The Invitation and XX, told me last year, but to be terrified in a familiar form that allows us just a bit of control over our experience. Control! Wouldn't that be a nice feeling to have right now? The year isn't over, and maybe a good cathartic scare is on its way. Otherwise, here's to a golden age of horror returning in 2019.
Jesus Christ. I thought I was a cynic.
Right? What a mess. How wrong can you be? There's been so many good horror movies.
Right. Like, I feel like if you're going to cite movies like Winchester and The Nun and Slender Man, then you might as well say that every year is a bad year for horror, because it's that kind of shit that gets cranked out en masse. Like,
yeah, she didn't mention garbage of last year, like The Snowman, or...
There was so much, like, there's good and bad every year, but, like, we're definitely in a new renaissance for horror, I think, in the latter half of the 2010s, you know?
Yeah, she, like, mentions Hereditary, for example, without, you know, emphasizing anything besides that she didn't think it was fun.
Right,
Which,
exactly.
First of all, Hereditary is very fun.
Yeah, but also, like, it's not trying to be, like, super over-the-top, like, fun horror. Like, it's a serious horror film, you know? Same with Suspiria. I know we have our differences of opinion on the new Suspiria, but that is not a film that's supposed to be joyful, you know? There are fun horror movies, like Overlord, that we just talked about, or like Mom and Dad, which we talked about earlier this year, which also is another fantastic horror movie that came out this year. Like, there's a difference between fun horror movies and serious horror movies. Like, it doesn't have to have a sense of joy to be good. In fact, sometimes trying to make it fun is what ruins it. You know, you have to know the film you're trying to make. Like, I would say, if anything, 2018 has just been a continuation of the strengthening golden age of horror, as she calls it, that I think started in like 2014 even, you know, that has just been gaining strength and power since then. I think that, I don't know, maybe this woman is too jaded by 2018 Hell World, which it is hard not to be at times, but what the fuck are you talking about 2018 being a bad year for horror? It's objectively not true.
Yeah, and, like, she has such a specific definition of horror. Like, if you don't consider A Quiet Place to be horror, then I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
Like,
Quiet Place is absolutely horror.
Yeah. Well, that was all for that trash fire of an article.
Yeah,
but...
if you want to read that article in its entirety, we did tweet a link to that on our Twitter. So check that out if you want to dive further into the depths of how jaded this poor woman was. But yeah, I guess that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Do we have a plan for next week?
We will be watching a movie.
Yes.
Or two.
Next week.
Or three.
Next week, there will be an episode in which we talk about between one and several horror films. Sorry we didn't plan it out ahead, but it'll be there, so it'll be a surprise for you and a surprise for us. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you like the show, leave us a sweet, sweet rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod, where you can see stuff like that article, see some bad takes. Follow us on Letterboxd for the list of all the movies we've talked about on the show to date with our average ratings and links to those episodes. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome.
And I'm at Mr. Sheets.
And yeah, we love you. We appreciate you. Keep being scared. And until next time, this has been the Pod People. Go out and do your civic duty and punch a Nazi.
Right in the face.
Right in the face.